I want to emphasize that the following content contains sensitive and disturbing information. Viewer discretion is advised as we explore the darkest corners of humanity's history. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to our channel. Today we're diving into the chilling world of true crime. Prepare yourselves because in this video, we're counting down the top 10 notorious killers in the world. These individuals sent shockwaves through history with their heinous acts, leaving us both horrified and fascinated by the depths of human darkness. So whether you're a true crime enthusiast, seeking to satisfy your curiosity, or just looking to comprehend the complexities of criminal psychology, this video will provide you with a thought-provoking journey into the minds of those who committed unimaginable deeds. Top 10 is Pedro Lopez. Pedro Lopez, also known as the Monster of the Andes, is a notorious Colombian serial killer who gained international infamy for his heinous crimes. Between the late 1960s and early 1980s, Lopez preyed upon young girls across several South American countries, including Colombia, Ecuador, and Peru. His modus operandi typically involves luring young girls, often impoverished and vulnerable, away from their families with promises of gifts or food. Once he had his victims isolated, he would sexually assault and murder them, frequently leaving their bodies in remote locations. In 1981, Lopez was convicted of his crimes in Ecuador, murdering 110 girls and sentenced to a lengthy prison term. He also confessed an additional 240 murders in Peru and Colombia. He was promptly deported to Colombia, but was rearrested due to the public outcry over his release. Lopez's subsequent fate remains somewhat unclear, as he was declared legally insane in 1995 and committed to a psychiatric institution. Top 9 is Joseph James DAngelo. Joseph James DAngelo, also known as the Golden State Killer and the East Area Rapist, is a notorious American serial killer, rapist, and burglar who terrorized California for more than a decade. DAngelo's reign of terror began in the mid-1970s when he started committing a series of burglaries, rapes, and murders in various California cities. He initially targeted single women who lived alone, breaking into their homes, tying them up, and subjecting them to brutal sexual assaults. As his crimes escalated, he began killing his victims, often using ligatures to strangle them. He meticulously planned his attacks, frequently wearing ski masks and disguises to avoid being identified. However, his true identity remained a mystery until 2018, when advancements in DNA technology and genealogy databases enabled investigators to connect him to the crimes through familial DNA analysis. In April 2018, Joseph James DAngelo was arrested at his home in Citrus Heights, California, ending a decades-long hunt for the elusive serial killer. Top 8 is Joachim Kroll. Joachim Kroll, also known as the Ruhr Cannibal and the Duisburg Man-Eater, was a notorious German serial killer who terrorized his community during the 1960s and early 1970s. His heinous crimes shocked the world and left a lasting mark on criminal history. Over the course of nearly 2 decades, he went on to commit a series of horrifying crimes, including murder, mutilation, necrophilia, and cannibalism. His modus operandi typically involved luring young women and children into his home, where he would then strangle or stab them. His crimes eventually caught the attention of the authorities. In 1976, a plumber working in Kroll's apartment discovered human remains clogging the pipes. In 1982, Joachim Kroll was brought to trial for his heinous crimes. He was found guilty of 8 murders and sentenced to life imprisonment. During his trial, Kroll displayed a disturbing lack of remorse and justified his actions by claiming that he was saving money on food by consuming human flesh. Top 7 is Jack the Ripper. Jack the Ripper is one of the most infamous and enigmatic serial killers in history, known for a series of brutal and unsolved murders that occurred in London's Whitechapel district in 1888. The true identity of Jack the Ripper remains a mystery to this day. The name Jack the Ripper originated from a series of letters supposedly sent by the killer to the media and police during the time of the murders. However, the authenticity of these letters is debated, and some may have been pranks or attempts to gain notoriety. The murders attributed to Jack the Ripper took place on 1888. The victims, all prostitutes, were found brutally murdered, with their throats slashed and their bodies mutilated in a manner suggesting a disturbing level of surgical skill. Several individuals have been proposed as potential suspects, including local residents, doctors, and even members of the British royal family. However, none of these theories have been definitively proven, and the true identity of Jack the Ripper remains elusive. Top 6 is John Wayne Gacy. John Wayne Gacy, often referred to as the Killer Clown, was an American serial killer who gained notoriety for his heinous crimes in the 1970s. He lured teenage boys and young men, many of whom he knew from his community involvement, to his home under the guise of offering them work or money. He would restrain and sexually assault them before ultimately murdering them, with his modus operandi often involved using handcuffs, rope, and other restraints to subdue his victims. The police obtained a search warrant for his home in December 1978, and during the search, they discovered a horrifying scene. The bodies of 29 young men hidden in the crawl space beneath his house, as well as other remains scattered around his property. In 1980, John Wayne Gacy was found guilty of multiple counts of murder and was subsequently sentenced to death. Throughout his trial, he attempted to manipulate the legal proceedings, at times even representing himself. He was executed by lethal injection on May 10, 1994, finally putting an end to his reign of terror. Top 5 is Albert Fish. An American serial killer and cannibal who operated during the early 20th century, Fish's outward appearance was unassuming, and he often came across as a harmless and elderly man. This facade allowed him to blend into society, concealing the monstrous urges that lurked beneath the surface. One of Fish's most heinous crimes was the abduction, murder, and cannibalization of Grace Budd, a 10-year-old girl. His chilling letters to the Budd family, in which he described the atrocities he had committed, were instrumental in his eventual capture. His correspondence contained graphic descriptions of the murder, the consumption of Grace's flesh, and his own self-flagellation practices. The letters painted a disturbing picture of a man who derived pleasure from causing pain and suffering, both to himself and his victims. In 1935, Albert Fish was finally apprehended and put on trial for the murder of Grace Budd. During the trial, his lawyer attempted to present him as mentally insane, arguing that he was not fit to stand trial due to his history of mental illness. Despite this defense, Fish was found guilty and sentenced to death. On January 16, 1936, he was executed in the electric chair at Sing Sing Correctional Facility in New York. Top 4 is Jeffrey Dahmer. Jeffrey Dahmer, also known as the Milwaukee Cannibal or the Milwaukee Monster, was an infamous American serial killer and sex offender. Dahmer's reign of terror began in the late 1970s and lasted until his arrest in 1991. He targeted young men, primarily of Asian or African American descent, luring them with promises of money or alcohol. Once he had them in his apartment, he would drug them and then carry out horrific acts of sexual assault, torture, and murder. Dahmer's modus operandi included necrophilia, dismemberment, and even acts of cannibalism. Dahmer's downfall came in 1991 when one of his intended victims managed to escape his clutches and led police officers to Dahmer's apartment. Upon entering the apartment, the police discovered a gruesome scene. Photographs of dismembered bodies, preserved body parts, and evidence of Dahmer's unspeakable crimes. Dahmer was subsequently arrested and charged with 17 counts of murder and was sentenced to 16 life terms in prison, totaling over 900 years. While in prison, he was murdered by a fellow inmate who used a metal bar from the prison's gym to beat Dahmer and another inmate to death. Top 3 is Andrei Chikatello. Also known as the Butcher of Rostov and the Red Ripper, was a Soviet serial killer who terrorized the Rostov Oblast region of the Soviet Union, now part of Russia, from 1978 to 1990. His killing spree began in 1978, targeting young children and teenagers, both boys and girls. Chikatello's modus operandi usually involved luring his victims to secluded areas where he would then sexually assault, mutilate, and murder them. He displayed a pattern of sadistic behavior, often committing acts of necrophilia and cannibalism after his victims were dead. In 1992, Chicatello stood trial for 53 counts of murder, and his trial gained international attention due to the horrific nature of his crimes. Despite his attempts at an insanity defense, He was found guilty on all counts and sentenced to death. Andre Chicatello was executed by a firing squad on February 14, 1994. Top 2 is Harold Shipman. Also known as Dr. Death, was an English doctor and one of the most prolific serial killers in history. The extent of Shipman's murder was revealed when concerns were raised about the number of his patients who had died unexpectedly. An investigation was launched, which eventually led to his arrest in September 1998. The police discovered that Shipman had been administering lethal doses of drugs, primarily morphine and other opioids, to his patients. He would falsify medical records to make it appear as though the patients had died of natural causes, even though the cause of death was in reality a deliberate overdose. In January 2000, Harold Shipman was found guilty of 15 counts of murder and 1 count of forgery for falsifying the will of one of his victims. He was sentenced to life imprisonment and was recommended to serve a minimum of 15 years before being eligible for parole. At top 1 of the most notorious serial killers is Ted Bundy. Ted Bundy, born Theodore Robert Bundy, was an infamous American serial killer and one of the most notorious criminals of the 20th century. He gained notoriety for his charm, intelligence, and seemingly normal demeanor, which allowed him to mask his true nature and carry out a series of brutal murders. Bundy's killing spree began in the early 1970s. He would often approach young women, usually college students, under the pretense of needing assistance or faking an injury. Once he gained their trust, he would overpower and abduct them, often using his charm and manipulation to lure his victims into his control. Bundy's downfall came in 1975 when he was pulled over for a suspicious vehicle in his possession. Inside the car, police discovered burglary tools and suspicious items that linked him to some of the missing women. Bundy's case drew extensive media attention not only due to the brutality of his crimes, but also because of his enigmatic personality and his ability to attract supporters and admirers despite the horrific nature of his actions. On January 24, 1989, Ted Bundy was executed in the electric chair at Florida State Prison. And there you have it, folks, a chilling journey through the top 10 notorious killers in the world. This list reminds us that the depths of human behavior can sometimes be unimaginable. While it's important to explore these stories for the sake of understanding, let this serve as a stark reminder that as a society, we must continue to strive for empathy, awareness, and justice. Before we part ways, don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel for more thought-provoking content. Your engagement fuels our mission to educate and inspire discussions about these complex topics here on US Top 10 TV. Thank you for joining us on this unsettling but important exploration. Until next time, stay curious and stay safe.